down here was the biggest swimming hole around. And they all have stories about coming off the hill, and I would love to know the stories of the signatures on the grain bin. So I don't know what all that grain bin experienced. So we have a situation, and now the auction's over, and they're standing there. And this is part of that story, that they wanted to know what was going to happen because they perceived this as theirs. It's to the point that even now, years later, if cows get in my yard, my neighbors tell me. They're constantly watching it. It's their property. They have an association with it. We've taken this, and Nancy wasn't into the Civil War. She really wasn't even significantly into history. And with the Two Rivers being here, she basically had an apprenticeship. And she learned how to do the filming and all this other stuff that goes with it, and all this ability to get in the computer and do the genealogy, and so that's all she does anymore. And so this has just been a growing project, and it's just kept growing. This site's been used for the Civil War. When we had the centennial, they came here in 62. The 150th anniversary of 62. We've had 3 big reenactments. One of them was 600 people, but a bunch of living histories. But the biggest thing is the kids camp. About 28, 30 of them come once a year and spend a day here and have volunteers come help us from the community, volunteers from the reenactors, and we all have a grand time. And so that's what's going on in this property. And then it has intermittently had tours. It isn't anything we do professionally. It's just, we take care of it. We live 3 miles down the road. I'm up here every day. I don't have to clean up. I can come up here and do what I want to do. And we just have met so many wonderful people, and it just kept growing into being on the boards of different places, including the Shenandoah Valley Battlefield Foundation, the local historical society. It just goes on and on. So when Nancy comes, she'll give you the good stuff about the house. I can, but she's better. And here she's prepared these DVDs. And one of them is on this property. The other one is something that she and I did, talking about what happened, the magic that happened in Port Republic 2 days after this battle. They could have changed a lot of things because Jackson really got caught. And I'll let you go ahead with that. And then when we're through, I'll go over here to the map. I have a map that's been here, I forgot how long, 15 years or more. It was created. The grounds is very accurate, and it's a good teaching tool for this particular battlefield. I can tell you all about this battlefield on that map. The very back edge of the property is Virginia Warm Fence. And that fence was there, and then there was a woodlot. Nobody knows how big a woodlot, but they could hide in it. It's a group of trees. And they set up an ambush for the 8th New York, who came forward. And they came forward in 2 rows, support arms, officers walking backwards, and they just didn't understand the battlefield. And it just happened that the South moved off this hill with Trimble into that attack position. And their skirmisher said, "You won't believe they're coming." And they fell back and they just set up an ambush. And they killed half of 550 boys in 1 or 2 volleys. Boom, boom, boom. We don't know whether it's 2 volleys or 3. But I'll tell you quotes when I get over there about that battle. So right now I'll let you do the electrical stuff. I'm no good at it.
I'm told all I have to do is press play.
She has a hands piece. You see it? That's it.
And play is circled in red.
Okay. There we go.
And it said play up at the top, so I think it'll start. There you go. And then we'll change the disc
The story
for the next
begins
one.
around 1830 when Peter Pickle approaches this man.
Dropped the deluded victims of northern fanaticism and misrule by the scores. But he was also quick to pay tribute to the fallen Federals, saying that their gallantry deserved a better fate. third son, enlisted as a private in the 58th Virginia. He was at Cross Keys on June 8, 1862, though we're not sure if he was in action or just visiting mom. Nevertheless, he was captured by the North and sent to Camp Chase Prison in Ohio. He would be released in late November of that same year. Her fifth son, Franklin Pence, served for Company K of the 8th Virginia Infantry. In 1863, he was at a little battle called Gettysburg and was injured at Pickett's charge. And finally, in 1864, Widow Pence's number 4 son, Sylvester, paid the ultimate price and was killed at the Battle of the Wilderness. Not only did Widow Pence sacrifice her sons in this terrible Civil War, she found herself in the middle of the fighting as well. As noted in that local newspaper several days after the battle, Widow Sarah Pence's house was entirely stripped from garret to cellar. In a few words, all was taken. No provisions of any kind were left. Bedding, clothing of every description, wagon, gear, bees, etc. So nearly was this poor widow woman robbed entire that she has been compelled to leave her house, give up housekeeping, and lives with her friends and relatives. Truly a sad case and deserves the kind sympathy of the public. Loss, $1,200 to $1,500. David Pence was Widow Pence's oldest child. He did not fight in the war, perhaps because as the oldest he stayed home to tend to the family farm and their mother, the Widow Pence. But I think more likely it was because he had married this lady, Elizabeth Miller. The Miller family were charter members of the Mill Creek Church of the Brethren and staunch pacifists. Elizabeth wasn't a lady to be taken lightly, however. The story goes that in 1864 she was chopping wood in her front yard when a Union soldier rode up on his horse and asked, "Where's your old man?" David had taken the family livestock over to the nearby hollow to hide from the plundering Yankees. Elizabeth responded, "I don't have an old man, and anyhow it's none of your business." The irritated soldier repeated this question to the defiant lady and said, "I want to know where your husband is." The fearless woman replied, "I'm not going to tell you anything. And if you don't get away from here, I'll get you with his axe." And with that, she jerked the axe from the chopping block and shook it at the wide-eyed young man. The intruder obviously recognized the seriousness of this stout lady, as he quickly left, never to bother her again. Since 2004, we've held a children's Civil War camp each summer. We want to help our young ones to better understand the who, what, and whys of that terrible time, because we really can't understand who we are today unless we understand our American Civil War. The Widow Pence Farm gave of herself during the Civil War, and she continues to keep on giving today. She's given us a chance to preserve this precious piece of historic land, a place where so many young men of unwavering courage and beliefs sacrificed, some paying the ultimate price, for their country. Yes, it was a terrible time, but it was a turning point for our nation. It was when a group of young individual states came together and became one, United States of America. Irvin and I take comfort in knowing that people for generations to come will stand at this site, look out over these fields, and be moved just like we've been.
city of Richmond, and he felt that Jackson could threaten Washington, D.C. And so he devised a plan to try to corner Jackson and Strasburg with Fremont from the west and Shields from the east and Banks moving south into the Shenandoah Valley.
And what had happened was when General Shields got to Luray, he had 4 brigades with him. But he heard a rumor that General Longstreet was coming from eastern Virginia through Thornton's Gap, which is where US 211 runs through now. And so he left 2 of his brigades there in Luray, brought the other 2 brigades up here to help Conrad's store there. And then he stayed at Conrad's store, General Shields. He never made it to battle. He sent the 2 brigades forward under General Erasmus Tyler, another political general. He was an Ohio fur merchant before the war. And Tyler, acting on orders from Shields, sent a force down here to capture this bridge and hold it so that Fremont could link up with Shields. And that was the raid that morning of June 8th.
Jackson's soldiers were called the foot cavalry because they covered a lot of ground in marching. And they really were quite good at this. And they covered a long distance, well over 250 miles in the campaign of 1862, referred to the Valley Campaign. It was a name that I don't know the specific origin of, but when Taylor came, Taylor had his soldiers trained so that they didn't have many stragglers, and they marched for 45 minutes and rested 15. And Jackson was doing the same thing, and Taylor referred to Jackson's infantry as foot cavalry. June the 8th, 1862, the Army was finally at rest. They were relaxed, some were fishing, some were washing their clothes. It was a very fatigued Army. It was a very nice day. It got up into the middle 70s, so it was comfortable. But the river was at flood stage, and you couldn't cross it except at the bridge without risk of drowning. We know that Lucius Robinson's Ohio battery had 4 artillery pieces, and he left 2 of them back on Yost Hill, defended by the 7th Indiana Regiment. The 2 cannons at that position remained there and were to fire and protect either end of the bridge. They were strategically located because they were about a half a mile away with reasonable elevation on top of Yost Hill, and they were at a perfect 90-degree angle to the bridge. And their job was to protect either end of the bridge, because Carroll had in his pocket a 4-day-old order stating the bridge was to be saved. Now, as Carroll approached the crossing of the middle ford, the cavalry that belonged to the south recognized they were coming, and they just ran away. They ran back to Brown's Gap. We only know of a situation where someone in the cavalry came down to the first fort across the river, they fired the artillery pieces into town. And these early shots, plus Lieutenant Kerfoot and rumors that Sandy Pendleton had heard, were why Jackson was moving out of Madison Hall and began his ride across town. Jackson came out on the steps of Madison Hall when the firing began. And Jackson's horse was not saddled up at that time, and he had to wait until his horse was saddled, and then he and his staff rode across town. The cavalry from the 1st West Virginia were spilling in at 90 degrees from the South River side, Middle Ford, and Jackson rode through them. He had a blue uniform on. He was wearing his VMI uniform yet. He got to the Methodist church, and Hunter Holmes McGuire had his pistol out, and he was threatening his wagon masters because they wanted to pull away with the ambulances and leave the wounded. And Jackson admonished Hunter McGuire because he was cussing. He was threatening the wagon masters not to pull off. And the reason they were so scared is some of the original shells that came into town actually hit the church steeple, and some of the slate fell down where they were trying to remove the soldier. Jackson rode across, and they were under small arms fire as they rode from the church to the mouth of the bridge. And as Jackson went across the bridge, there was an artillery piece on Yost Hill that fired at the bridge, and some historians say it hit the bridge, but it was 90 degrees to the bridge, perfect shot, and Jackson went across.
Just below the present-day bridge over there going across the South River. There were no bridges there at the time of the war. Two other cannons from Lucius Robinson's Ohio battery came into the village, and one of them set up right here, facing through the bridge, and the other set up right there at the crossroads.
Now, you have Jackson on the north side of the bridge, but it's the 37th Virginia who was prepared for inspection, and they were brought forward by Jackson. Now, Jackson has up here a lot of infantry. He has at least 4 batteries of artillery. And so Pope's battery is the closest, and he comes to the top of the hill on the north side of the bridge. And Jackson looks down here, and he sees this artillery piece that's in the mouth of the bridge under a sergeant by the name of Gildea. And back here is Lucius Robinson with the 10-pounder pointed in the other direction down toward Madison Hall. And he sees these artillery people in blue uniforms. And he tells Pope to shoot.
And he orders the lieutenant in charge of that bridge guard to open fire on the cannoneers down in the road. The lieutenant said, "Sir, I don't think we should open fire. I think those men are from the new Charlottesville battery." And Jackson said, "They have blue uniforms on." And the lieutenant said, "Well, those men do have blue uniforms." Before everything got fairly standardized. So Jackson, at that point, wasn't real sure that he was right. These were Union cannoneers down here.
So Jackson hollers from the other side of the bridge, "Bring that piece over here." And these fellas over here see Jackson on his horse over there, perfect target, and they bring their cannon and they start to bring it up and aim it at Jackson. And Gildea thought he really wanted to shoot right then and there, but he couldn't fire. He's a sergeant. He had to wait for his orders from Captain Lucius Robinson, who's back on the corner. When Lucius gets his orders back to him that he can fire, Jackson recognizes that he brought the barrel up, which is threatening. Jackson spun his horse, and when he fired, there was no Jackson with it. Jackson had disappeared. And so Jackson could have been injured or killed there. He could have been captured back at the church. And so Jackson is up there, and he tells Colonel Fulkerson to bring his men down obliquely buy his piece. And he decides the best way for the soldiers of Colonel Carroll's unit to get out of town is for him to block the bridge rather than kill the soldiers. And so he turns his gun just a little sideways, so he's hoping that he can hit the support of the bridge roof, knock the bridge roof down, and the infantry can't come across.
It's not lined up quite straight, so it goes into the bridge and off through this side of the bridge. And when it does, it takes out part of the right side of the bridge, and the bridge roof tilts. And there's debris in the bridge, but it's still basically open. And a few minutes after that, when the 37th Virginia charges through the bridge, captures this gun here, and then captures the gun at the crossroads. And the gun up there was facing in the other direction. Because while this was all starting here, 150 cavalrymen from the 1st Virginia Loyal Cavalry came through where the cannery was, and they saw up at the road beyond Madison Hall, Jackson's wagon train with the bright new white canvas tops that he had captured in First Winchester. And they realized this is a line train. They couldn't see any troops around them, so they started making down the road towards that wagon.
The wagons become very much in disarray. They're fearful of being captured. They're fearful of being destroyed. They're all trying to hitch up, and there's a great deal of confusion. Up there is an artillery battery, Carrington's battery for Richmond. They're a very interesting group because, first of all, they don't belong in this position. They were instructed the night before to get ammunition and then go to Kemper's Hill. Well, Kemper's Hill is on the other side of the river. And a member of this crew is related to the family of Kempers that are living at Madison Hall. And he misunderstands, and this unit is out of place. This unit has 6 artillery pieces, and the 2 lieutenants are Lieutenant Timberlake and Lieutenant Dimwitty. Now, Carrington has not had any experience at firing artillery pieces. The 2 lieutenants have, the crew members have not. They're brand new, they have blue uniforms. At this point, that first artillery piece comes into this second 90-degree curve. They try to get it into position before the cavalry comes down the road. During this time, Captain Moore brings his 20 soldiers up behind the fence and forms his 20-man scattering of other men and a few cavalrymen. And so there's light infantry there with a cannon behind them, but the cannon can't get ready to fire in time. The Union cavalry comes down Main Street. They get to this lane right in front of me, where Main Street makes a right-angle turn going to the west, and they go up that lane. The cavalry goes up this road. This road was deeper at that time than it is now, and so they're a little congested, and as they get out in front of Madison Hall Lane, the people at the upper corner turn and fire on them. And it is between 20 and 40 rifles and no artillery, and the cavalry feels really put upon. They're scared. The horses twirl. The cavalry retreats down Main Street to about the church, and there they regain their strength. And they realize that it was a small group up here. And so they come charging down this road this time, not kind of at a trot, but they're really coming. And at that time, Captain Moore is smart enough to have his men leave this upper position, come to the second position, which is behind the fort fence, looking straight down Main Street. At this time, 2 more artillery pieces have come here because Dabney has talked to Dinwiddie, Lieutenant, and they have brought 2 more pieces here. And those 2 pieces are beginning to fill in behind me to the side of Madison Hall. The first artillery piece now is behind the board fence. You have to remember that these people were not prepared to fire this gun. They do not have at this moment canisters, so they have a solid shot in the gun. And it is aimed into the board fence, but the board fence is in front of it. The cavalry that are the Union cavalry coming down Main Street are disintegrates and boards pinwheel everywhere down toward the cavalry horses, causing them to retreat. And then there's small arm fire, probably greater than 40 rifles at this time, begin to clear that street. Now the two artillery pieces come up behind the piece of defense. So there's three artillery pieces facing down Main Street. Now they start to load grape shot. And they start to what they call sweep the street. They start shooting down the street and taking out everything they can. The artillery piece at the other side, belonging to the Union, fires back, and there is an exchange of artillery here. Confusion occurs down on Main Street. You have infantry coming down across the bridge. You have the artillery fire going in here. And so everything is jammed up in the middle, and people are going everywhere. The Union fled this position in great haste. This whole episode in the village took 30 minutes to 45 minutes, a little longer possibly, but not much. And it had to be an amazing amount of activity and energy. As this ends and begins to quiet down, then you can hear the artillery fire occurring at the beginning and Cross Keys battlefield.
So two great things happened here that morning. The Jackson hadn't been able to secure the place for the Confederates, and you will not be able to join them that next morning or that night. And his wagons have been lost, people lost so many supplies, munitions, and things like that. It's a whole other story. We wouldn't be studying the Valley campaign the way we do now.
Historians really hate what if questions, but there are always those questions of what if here at Port Republic. The loss of Jackson would have been demoralizing to the people of the Shenandoah Valley and to a very significant part of the Southern Army, because Jackson was at that time being recognized as a significant player, both north and south, in the Civil War.
Okay, so there you have the story of some of the fighting at Cross Keys and Port Republic. Some of the things not mentioned in there we'll go to tomorrow. We will also go to all of those sites. Walk some of the ground. We'll be at the site of the ambush of 8th New York. Got a little drama to enact out there. And someone said to me in about today, what was the significance of fighting here? And if you remember at our orientation, I made the comment that it was certainly significant to the soldiers who fought here, to the families who lost somebody here. But it also is significant in the bigger picture, and that we'll cover a little bit tomorrow. Okay, what we're gonna do next, Ken, if you wanna cut? Cut. Okay, sure. We have the food here.
Battle of Port Republic, June 9th, 1862. Stonewall Jackson, the Valley Campaign. And here we are at Widow Pence Farm in Virginia. Today is Sunday, October 20th, 2019. Part of the Civil War time travelers' third battlefield trip. And there's a map, Battle of Port Republic, again, June 9th, 1862. Shields and Fremont are the Union generals. Jackson is the Stonewall Jackson is the Confederate. And then we'll go over to this painting here, and I'll read. Port Republic was the last and hardest fought battle of General Thomas Stonewall Jackson's celebrated 1862 Shenandoah Valley Campaign.
After chasing Nathan Banks' Union Army across the Potomac River in late May, General Jackson found himself pursued by Generals John C. Fremont and James Shields. General Jackson turned back General Fremont at Cross Keys, 4 miles west of Port Republic, on June 8, 1862, then turned his attention to George Shields. In pursuing Jackson, General Shields had unwisely divided his force, sending General Erastus B. Tyler ahead with the force of some 3,000 men. General Tyler aligned his Union cavalry and aligned along the sunken roadbed 2 miles north of Port Republic, Virginia, anchoring his left flank on the hill where charcoal had been produced prior to the war, known as the coaling. Here they posted 7, some say 6, federal guns commanding the fields below. At dawn on June 9, 1862, General Stonewall Jackson attacked. The Stonewall Brigade, commanded by General Winder, was sent ahead without support and were easily repulsed. Additional Confederate forces arrived in time to thwart a Federal counterattack. While fighting still raged on the plain, Richard Taylor's Louisiana Brigade advanced against the coaling. They had a difficult time getting through the heavy underbrush common around charcoal piles. After 2 failed attempts, the Taylor's rebels took the hill, and the guns then that were there, such a threat to their comrades in the field below. General Tyler fell back. General Shields' main body north near Conrad Store, having lost over 1,000 men. Confederate losses numbered about 800. The next day, General Shields withdrew towards Fort Royal, leaving Jackson in control of the Upper Valley.
Well, most of the cannons stayed in place. They usually stick to the cover.
Oh, that's because I took it off delicate.
Yeah, that's all right. Thank you. I'm going to stand in this corner if you don't mind.
It's better, huh?
Yeah.
Is that okay here in this corner?
No, it's fine. Yeah.
You didn't touch that, did you?
No, no. So where are we?
Yeah, we're gonna educate you to that. This is where we're at here. And in the movie, they talked about Trimble moving forward. And this is Trimble's position here. This is the woods right here behind me. Okay? The Confederate line is here. And I'll tell you a little while later why that's in that position. You're welcome here, but I want this corner.
Okay, or I thought you want the beer.
Well, then just a beer. It's just I want to tell the story from here. You have a situation where Harrisonburg is this direction over here. This is north. And they come in Port Republic Road. And this is 2 days after Turner Ashby is killed. Mumford has been in charge of the cavalry, but there's a lot of confusion because of the leadership. Turner Ashby led from the front, didn't do much as far as command and control, and the cavalry was quite large.
I'm sorry, sir. I didn't mean to interrupt. I'm a bit of Civil War novice. Turner Ashby was
Killed.
I get that.
He was chief of cavalry.
Thank you. That's right.
He was chief of cavalry and he died.
Yes.
And he led from the front, but he didn't have good command control.
How many troops are we talking about total here?
Troops,
Soldiers.
Fremont had 12,000, I'm sorry. And you have 8,500 with the South, but this is only half of Jackson's army. He took the other half to Port Republic. And this 8,500 gets diluted because when the town of Port Republic is invaded, 1,500 of these men try to get to Port Republic to help Jackson. They don't amount to much, and they end up coming back here at the end of the day, and they get filtered into the battlefield. So Turner Ashby is killed, and you have a situation where Fremont comes down this way. He makes several bad decisions. First of all, he has cavalrymen out on this flank and that flank, and actually the North have good cavalrymen, but the cavalry never does anything in this battle, either south or north, and they just are on the peripheries. The battlefield is pretty well confined to this ridge and the land in front of it, because when Fremont comes down here, he makes this decision that he's at right angles to the Southern Army. He has no perception. He marched down this road and completely flanked this position.
If we're looking at this from here to there, how many miles are we looking at inside your display here?
You know, I've never measured that, but if I have to guess off the top of my head,
Yeah,
probably 5 by 5.
well, just an idea.
It's a pretty good sized battlefield. And this is north. And so Fremont has a lot of officers that are northern of multiple languages, Hungarian, German, etc. And he, unfortunately, as he marched down here, his marching orders were picked up over in this side of the battlefield by a man by the name of Dunca, who was, if I'm correct, he was Hungarian. And so Ewell knew everything he was facing. But Ewell was put in this position by Jackson, who told him to hold this position and hit Fremont and hold him back. Jackson had in his head that he could beat this Fremont if he went down and took care of Carroll and Taylor coming out of Page Valley. And he thought that would be the easiest way because it's more narrow valley, and it's also, everything was wet, so you could hardly move your troops up and down that valley. And he was hoping to beat them and then come back here and fight here. But these two armies were advancing, and they were coming around Massanutten Mountain. And they perceived that they had Jackson cornered here. And Jackson was continually protecting his march to rear to the city of Stanton, or to go through the Browns Gap and go over in the other part into Louisa County. And Fremont came in, and he never recognized the battlefield arrangement, and he never appreciated the Union artillery tapered off about midday because they didn't have enough artillery ammunition, and Fremont never picked that up. He also made a mistake in the fact that he perceived that was the strong side of the line, and so he was going to feint there and attack here. And this is kind of a 4 o'clock arrangement. And you have, as Fremont came in, they came across here, right down this Kieseltown Road, and there's a church over here. They call it a Union Church because there were two congregations in one building. And you have a situation where there's a little graveyard in here, and they fought down through a little valley where there's a big spring, and up here, and the 15th Alabama was there. They had never fought, and they had their packs and everything. And so as the Union advanced, they had to drop their packs and gradually fall back. And there's different stories whether they fell back good or they fell back bad. But Ewell said he had plenty of time to set up. It was on a Sunday, and they were in church, and he had to break up his soldiers who were in church because Fremont showed up with his congregation. And so at this time, this side was committed. It was Milroy and Schenck. And Schenck was the more timid one, and Milroy took part of his artillery. So Milroy was quite strong because he had half of Schenck's artillery plus his, and these were almost all Ohio units. And they almost broke through, but that took a long time in coming. The South set up on this ridge, and for years I couldn't get anybody to tell me why that was there. And I wanted to pay my taxes, and there in the wall was a big map about 8 foot by 8 foot, and it was the limestone soils of the county. This is a harder limestone. It has a different name than this. And so this is an erosion pattern. This is a branch of Mill Creek. It's not Mill Creek. It doesn't become Mill Creek till down here. But it carried a lot of water, and the little valleys were full of water, and they thought they were creeks just simply because of the rainfall. It was a really wet time of the year for here. And so when Fremont advanced, he came in and he started over here, and then 15th Alabama made the initial contact, and then they fell back, and they came clear over here because they were part of Trimble's brigade. And Trimble thought that he could advance. He didn't like this position. These were pine trees. Everything down there was deciduous and grazed, so you could see through it and pull your cannons to the front, and your infantry could move and hide behind trees. It was a good position. So Trimble asked permission to move forward. And you have different people say that they came from here, down here, across this creek, came through a swamp, and then got into these two little valleys. But there's a notch in the middle here and has more roads in it than I can count. And I'm sure he came down that notch and crossed the creek once and was in these two valleys. And he moved up into this position. This is the very back of this farm right here. And this is where you saw that Virginia worm fence right here. This was a white clover field, and that's where the attack site occurred because Trimble aligned his soldiers. He pulled back the two companies of the 21st North Carolina that were his spotters, and they had rifles, and then the 16th Mississippi had rifles, but the rest of them all had buck and ball. So he had 21st Georgia, the 16th Mississippi, and 15th Alabama. And when that unit from the 8th New York came up here, they came up on a rise just like a coffin top. And when they got to the top of the crown of the coffin, they were less distance than from here to that wall. And they fell into an ambush at that time. Half that unit, 500 plus men, were killed almost immediately. They ran all over the hill and came back here. Nobody knows why they came through their skirmishers and had no skirmishers in the front. Obviously, he thought that this is where he was going to meet the Confederates, but they moved up. You have a situation where, at that point, Trimble recognized he was disorganized. He pulled his men back, reformed them, and he saw that there was an artillery piece up here, battery. And so he took half the 15th Alabama down here and to come up this way and try and get that artillery piece. He told the men on the hill, if he gets into fighting, to come across. But he thought they'd come across together. And what happened is he came up here and he got beat back down into the valley. And then the 15th Alabama, half of it, and the 16th Mississippi came across, saved him. They get in control. But now the 27th Pennsylvania is on their flank. And he had the bucktails with them. And now they're getting the best of this because they're in a flanking position. The 21st North Carolina, 21st Georgia comes across, flanks everything. So everything here then becomes controlled by the South, everything's falling back. You have basically a consolidation of three batteries of artillery back here, Shermer, Buell, and Weidrich. And you have a situation I was talking about before that a captain was in charge of the artillery. It was removed from the general because of that boat was turned over. And you have Trimble, who's coming up this road and advancing all along here, a whole bunch of skirmishers that are pretty ill-descript. And you have Taylor is sent up here with 13th and 25th Virginia, and they're right on the crown of a hill. It's a very dominant hill, but he's on the crown of the hill. And he comes back into here and he walks in on Trimble, and Trimble cusses him out, so he comes back out. And this is where he took most of his casualties. Instead of, he advances and he gets to a fence line. And they're fighting, looking at each other across the fence, north and south. The 54th and 58th New York, the 75th and 74th Pennsylvania, and they're really shooting it out pretty good. And at a point that Taylor, he decides that he's not happy with this. Instead of pulling back, he moves over here into the woods, which flank that position. And that's when the artillery get pulled out. The 54th New York under Cosley said he could hold his position, but he was getting orders from all over, and none of it matched. And at that point, this whole part of the line fell back. The North had all these units up here under Colts. Never committed them at all.
At all?
At all.
The whole time?
They didn't come up here. Now this is Baird's Brigade. And Baird's Brigade to me is a wonderful story. They were the cutting edge at that time. And he had what they called a flying brigade. And he had the 1st Pennsylvania and the 1st New York. And he had the Pennsylvania Bucktails. And it had a battery of artillery. And he began in Madison County with Ord. And Ord went away. He went to defend Washington, D.C. and Alexandria. And, you have a situation where he joined Shields. Now that brigade is in the front of Shields' army. And it's not Shields that's pushing. It's the Baird's Brigade. They get up to Strasburg. They're on one side. Jackson's trying to go through the middle. And the other side is Fremont. Baird's Brigade's not strong enough, and Fremont doesn't commit, so Jackson gets his men through. Now they go from Shields' army to Fremont's army. And it's Baird's Brigade that's chasing them down the Shenandoah Valley, not Fremont. It's Baird's Brigade. And they're in constant, several times a day, fighting each other. And they get to Harrisonburg, and they come around the corner in Harrisonburg. And the wagons, Jackson has 8 miles of wagons, brand new canvas tops from what he captured up at Winchester. And he comes on the Port Republic Road, and it's a mud pie. And they're moving down there, but the tail's kind of coming along. And so you have a situation where you have these 3 little hills. And the South has 3 units that are kind of marching and then moving up. Turner Ashby's with them. You have a situation where the 1st Maryland is in the front, the 58th Virginia, and believe it or not, the Pennsylvania Bucktails have come up Chestnut Ridge from the other side, straight over the top, instead of going around. And they hit head on. But they're in file, the Confederates. You have a situation where the 1st Maryland does a right wheel, meets the Pennsylvania Bucktails. They have a good exchange of fire. The Bucktails take a few less casualties than the South, but they killed Turner Ashby. And that's what threw the Army into disarray. And that's how they got into the town of Port Republic, because the 3 cavalry units, Myers, Shipney, and Sipe, didn't do their job. Now you have a situation where I lost my train of thought. Get me in trouble. You have Fremont coming down here, and he takes this position, making all these assumptions. The Confederates held this position. They had time to get formed on this position, and they had their 4 units of battery here, and down here was Brockenbrough. Rice, Raines, and Luck were up here, and 1 Brockenbrough. South were pretty well controlled. They were all VMI boys and West Point boys. And they fired their artillery from the reverse slope of the hill, which was unheard of at that time. And 1 battery was here in the front and fired from the front, but that was the only one, and they controlled this field. The Confederates had 20 cannons, the North had 50, but the South had the best of the artillery on this particular day. Most of the fire was across this way, and some was this way, but most of it was in this area over the Flory farm. And after this side fell back, Shank was timid, and Milroy was about to break through, and Fremont lost his cool, and he ordered him to pull back. And Shank and Milroy questioned their orders multiple times. Milroy's horse was shot 3 times. His name was Jasper, and he did live. And you have a situation where Shank finally pulled out, and then Fremont gave orders for him to hold, and Milroy said, I can't hold. You know, both flanks are exposed. So that side of the line fell back, and the South basically controlled all this at night. And that night, Trimble wanted to advance and take on the Northern Army at night. He wanted to do that because Trimble was from the Midwest, and he felt very comfortable at night. And he was a slave, traveled across the United States as he went to West Point as a young boy. And you see other times in the Civil War where he exerts fighting at night. You have a situation where he's not given permission, he pouts, and he gets into a very significant story between running from here to Port Republic, talking to Jackson, and coming back finally to Ewell. Jackson's giving him specific orders, he's to listen to Ewell. But Ewell, the next morning, pulls out of this position, leaving all his fires and everything. The Union thinks the Confederates are still here, but he's pulled them all back to Port Republic. So they come up in here kind of marching, thinking they're going to get into a battle. And they get there and there's no enemy. And so then they proceed on to Port Republic. And then when he gets to Port Republic, Jackson has pulled out of Port Republic and burnt the bridge down in front of him and moved on to fight the Battle of Port Republic. And Fremont gets very irksome, and so he goes down on this side of the river and shoots in dead and wounded on the Port Republic battlefield after the battle's over. And Jackson had quite a bit to say about that to the Union Army, because Jackson left the Union wounded down there at that point. And they laid in the field several days.
How much in time did all this take place?
Most of it is in a day.
That's what I thought.
And part of the next day. The next day wasn't much of an event.
A lot of movement went on.
Yeah, I forget the exact figures. The South had something like 300 casualties and plus, and the North had 600 plus. So it's not a great big battle, but it was a significant event.
Irvin, do you think this was Ewell's finest day as a commander?
Ewell was not given enough credit. He did a wonderful job here. He did a better job in Port. They committed one piece after another, but it was Ewell who went up on the coaling. Had his horse shot out from underneath of him, and finally chased the Union off the coaling, which you're going to tell. No, Ewell did a wonderful job. And they kind of laugh here because Ewell had his headquarters in behind this line in the woods behind the church. And he had 2 people on his staff he had to take care of. He had Widow Brown's son, Campbell, and he also had a boy by the name of Turner who was engaged to the Widow Brown's daughter. And these were his couriers, and he's scared to death they're going to get hurt. And so he had a hard time trying to protect these boys and also take care of that. And he sent 1,500 boys back to fight Port Republic. So he went from 850 down to 7. And that's significant odds with that. And he held this position. And of course, toward the end of the day, when this end of the line really was getting beat up, he was able to shift the 31st out here and strengthen it with Brockenbrough. Brockenbrough's artillery were just wiped out. I mean, they were shot up the ground, looked like it had been plowed. And the 31st got down there, and then when the Louisians came up here, he sent half of them to that end of the battlefield and the other half to this end. So that's how this whole thing ended up.
Questions?
So what happened at the end? The Union just pulled off?
Union held. They came back the next day, and there wasn't an army here. So they marched down to Port.
Yeah.
Now they're in Port.
Yeah.
The bridge is burnt in front of them.
Can't cross.
And they moved down the river, shooting at the battlefield on the other side when it's over. And then they stayed one day, and at night they shelled their own troops because they thought they were Jackson. And that was the 54th New York. They were down on the river. And then they retreated after that.
Where'd they go, back to
Back home.
Washington?
Yeah, went back up to Strasbourg. Yeah, they just went up the valley in reverse.
What was the strategic value of this particular battle? I mean,
Well,
what were they?
the strategic part of it really is Jackson's campaign. These are the last two battles in Jackson's campaign, which held up well over 50,000 soldiers that should have been in Richmond.
Okay.
And that's a big thing. And
Over here for a little discussion.
I didn't really appreciate it until we went back there and stood there, and I thought, God, they were so young. Those boys were so young. Sarah was a widow when she built this place. Samuel, they lived over what we call near Cross Keys Tavern, which has been torn down, which is a tavern that was built in the 1700s. And people would stop there because it was crossroads before they went over the mountain.
1792?
No, earlier, probably 1740s. Or it was way back. And but they had lived over there, not them, but Sarah. Yeah, that was in the 1800s. But Samuel died in like 1842. And then what happened is her daddy was Peter Kiblinger and had a lot of land around here. And he gave each of his girls 50 acres. Margaret Kiblinger married a Perky. And when you came here on Port Road, Cross Keys Road, there was a little cemetery there. I don't know if some of you on the side that saw that. That's where Margaret's farm, Perky, and she's buried at that little cemetery. Polly was Sarah's sister, and she lived behind here. She was a 50-acre little farmette behind here down in the ravine. The house is still standing, and that's where she lived. So Widow Pence, he gave her this 50 acres, and she built this house. So she would have been a widow then, which is why they call it the Widow Pence farm. Hey, how are ya? They're looking for you.
Yeah,
They're probably over. Hi.
We were just over there.
How are you?
Good, nice
This
to
is
meet
Ken Rutherford, and I'm sorry.
Original house here.
This is the original house, yes. So this is the original house, and it was built, like I said, in 1843. Her 7 kids were here. Her daughter, though, got married and died in childbirth in the 1850-some. So that would have just been the boys and her here. And I think, you heard about the boys, but it would have been just like we see when we got it. It was a farmhouse, typical farmhouse. It had a divider here, and it was all paneled because you didn't want to have to look like you were poor back in those days. When they started, when the Myerses bought it in the early 1900s, you tried to put some lipstick on it so it looks like it wasn't just a log house. So they put paneling on the outside, and they divide the rooms up and everything. So it was a typical, and I'm sure up there y'all have typical farmhouses that's kind of divided up, and the stairway would have been enclosed and everything. Originally there wouldn't have been a staircase. There would have been a little square hole in the corner, and you would have gone up and down the ladder. What you see here, the log would have been, this would have been the first floor, second floor, and there would have been an attic. So it was a pretty big log house, considering. And the fireplace would have been brick. It was, again, when we got it, it was all covered up and everything. So I just liked limestone, so I wanted to get limestone back in here. And so I waited and looked and hunted, and that's old limestone from the old Strasbourg High School. And the mantle is from the old CC camp that was up here, Brown's Gap, and during Depression. And then during World War II, it was the largest conscientious objectors camp up there. And so that's what was in the paymaster's cabin and the post office. That mantle would have been in there. And so they would have lived here, and then when the battle started, she had gone over to her son's house, which is about a mile as the crow flies.
That's the oldest son?
The oldest son, which is a picture of him, and you saw him in the little, he was the one that stayed home, and the rest kind of, one went out west, and the others fought in the war for the Confederacy. But David would have farmed here, but they lived over there, and especially when they knew the battle was going to happen, she went over there, and she never came back because they just basically took everything from the house. And people say, well, did this serve as a hospital? Every building structure served as a hospital at some point, and so I'm sure that people were brought in here and taken care of. But she never came back. Now, when the boys came back, some of them lived here. I can't think of his name. The one that was injured at Gettysburg, he lived here for a while before he moved out west. And so they came back here and lived here for a while. And then the kids moved out west or moved on, and then it was just kind of empty for a while, and then it just changed hands until the Myers family bought it in the early 20, something like that.
23.
23, and they bought it, and then they, Mama put a bay window in here, and after a year or two, they added on the kitchen, and there was a few structures, a bedroom and a bathroom that they just built it right on the ground, and so they didn't really last. So we had to tear that down and added all that on, and that wooden and the addition is from an old barn in Madison County. So we tried to, everything here is original, floor, beams, everything's original. They had a little money, so this beading in the beam, and that was kind of a fancy thing they did to show that they had a little bit of money. And like I said, Sarah Widows Pence's daddy had a lot, was pretty well to do. Peter Kimberly, he had a lot of land around here. And so, and I'm trying to think what else, but you feel free to look around.
But this would have been a typical valley farmhouse.
A log house, yeah.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think it was probably bigger than normal. I mean,
bigger,
I think it was probably a little bit bigger than normal. I mean, it wasn't, but yeah, for a log house, yeah, it would have been. So yeah, and they would have cooked. They probably had a kitchen somewhere outside. Yeah. And there's a picture over here. It's the oldest one I have. The Myers built that probably in 1925 or something. And we kind of, it was different. Obviously, they had a pump and all that stuff. Yeah. So when we kind of redid it, we tried to save as much as the wood, make the cabinets and things like that, and try to preserve as much of the materials as we could. That table was from the old Western State Mental.
Oh, neat.
In Stanton. I just sit there sometimes and I just put my hands on the table and think, okay, I'd love to hear the stories. But that's from the wood from the old Western State Mental Institution. And that was around way in the mid 1800s. I mean, that was around for a long time before it closed down. I had no idea. I did some research for the Hopkins family and I found out that, it was around mid 1800s, and so that was kind of interesting. But yeah, so feel free to look around. I have stuff about the battle over there, and
Who plays the organ?
what's that?
Who plays the organ?
That's Irvin. My husband's a furniture-aholic, and believe it or not, most of this stuff we had stored in a garage or places. But he had that, and nobody plays it. You're welcome to play it. We had it redone, and it's playable. Do you play?
No.
Oh, okay. Usually I find somebody who does. If you've got strong legs.
Oh, you gotta pump it.
Oh yeah, it's a pump organ.
Yeah.
My grandmother used to play those things. She grew up in Elkins, West Virginia, and she used to play for the movie theater.
Oh.
And by golly, that's exhausting. The old silent movies? No, yeah.
And then she had church on Sunday.
And church, oh yeah, church on Sunday. Boy, she had good legs too. You had to pump those things, yeah.
You can see the hatchet axe marks in the beams upstairs.
Yes,
Kind of neat.
that's right.
How they
That's
cut
right.
them and everything.
Yep.
This is limestone base. So the topsoil, how fertile is this farmland?
Ladies and
Oh.
gentlemen, could I have your attention, please? Hey, y'all. I'd like you to meet a couple people here. This is Ken and Kim Rutherford. They have a story connected to the Widow Pence farm through Nancy and Irvin Hess. and they're here as our invited guests tonight, and I would say guests of honor. So I give you a very incredible couple. If I may share your story, I'll do that on the bus, unless you'd like to tell it right now.
We're just honored to be here.
Okay, well, you want to tell that story, or may I?
Give the microphone to him now.
Kim could.
No, I'll let
No,
Ken.
no, it's okay.
Ken, it's your story, honey. You tell it.
Yeah, honey.
Chicken.
Well, there's the current issue of the Civil War Times. I brought a copy for Nancy. Have you seen this?
No, sir.
So there's a 3-page feature by John Banks, who's one of your feature speakers next year, I understand. But I have a book on the Civil War coming out in December. It's called America's Buried History, Landmines in the Civil War. And the Civil War was the first war where landmines or IEDs were used on a widespread basis. And like Dave and Kay's son, Josh, who lost his legs, you know that, right?